That's right. Bear down, Bears fans. It's time for another edition of the Chicago Bears podcast, Bears Banter, powered by Second City Gridiron. Bill Zimmerman with you, and we are back. We are recharged. We are on the cusp of Chicago Bears football, regular season Chicago Bears football, not just this preseason crap. We are close. We are excited. And for those of you who don't like the open, shove it up your rears because it is an exciting time. And maybe if you listen to the podcast feed instead of just the YouTube feed, you'd hear Bears bear down underneath it. It may not sound so obnoxious, but that's a conversation for another day because we've got a lot to talk about today. We are going to be joined by Bobby Peters here in just about 20 minutes or so. Bobby, of course, great guy analyzing offenses and concepts, play calling. He does a great job, a local high school coach in Indiana or in Illinois. He's been on a lot of podcasts this offseason, does a great job talking about Ben Johnson's offense. We're going to have him on, talk about what he's seen the first couple preseason games, what he thinks Ben Johnson's ultimate goals are going to be with this offense this year, and just kind of talking about what Ben Johnson wants to do, play in and play out. So looking forward to that. But before we do that, let's dive in here. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this preseason game, this 38-0, just absolutely demolition of the Buffalo Bills, because again, it's preseason. We've had a lot of shows talk about it the last couple of days. So I'm just going to talk about one takeaway I had from the game that I genuinely really liked. Look, you love that basically everyone on the team played really well and that they crushed Buffalo. But in the end, does that result impact the regular season at all? No, of course not. It's just good to see. But what I did see that can impact the regular season is basically what I will just say, that the Bears looked like a professional football team. Forget the results of the plays. I'm talking about pre-snap, because pre-snap last year under Shane Waldron and Thomas Brown was not good. The amount of disorganization, the amount of illegal formations, illegal procedures, false starts, getting the play in late, getting up to the line of scrimmage late, delays of game, all this, we saw it so frequently. Like, what is going on? How can this team not being run professionally on the offensive side of the ball? That has changed drastically with Shane Waldron. We heard about it all spring, about how if they didn't get out of the huddle properly, they went back and did it again. He drilled this into the guys. Attention to detail, knowing exactly where you are supposed to be on each play. If you're not picking up concepts, if you're not trying, if you're making too many mistakes, you're not going to be with the first team. If you're doing it on the second team, you're going to be dropped to the third team. Like, they have had accountability across the boards, and the players respect it, understand it, and I really felt you started seeing the results of that in game 2 against the Buffalo Bills, because what we saw is a team at the line of scrimmage with plenty of time to spare. There was time to make adjustments, whatever needed to be done, calls that needed to be made at the line of scrimmage. They were constantly at the line of scrimmage with a good 15 seconds to go on the play clock. That was really good to see. And then in terms of the execution of the play pre-snap, we didn't see a lot of stupid mistakes. Now, the play at the end of the half where Bajan it was the second to last play of the half. Bajan got sacked, and then the Bills attempted a field goal that they missed. That play was kind of a disaster. The blocking was poor. Bajan was running for his life, and there were 2 decline penalties in that play. There was a procedural penalty, there was an illegal formation penalty, and a illegal motion penalty. It was 2 penalties. It was just basically a mess. So that play was not executed well. Put that play aside. Pretty much every other play was. And I'm not saying that meant it was perfect, that every block was perfect. I mean, it was pretty close based on everything. I'm not saying there weren't missed assignments and that things didn't happen in the body of the play. But in the pre-snap, we just did not see those illegal formations and false starts. Stephen Carlson had 1 false start. Other than that, though, it was so clean. And it gives you hope that the Bears, what have we talked about with this team for years, is how often they shoot themselves in the foot. that they have themselves a 2nd and 7, false start. Now it's 2nd and 12. And now you're not getting in those 2nd and managed, you get 2nd and decent, then you can get into 3rd and manageable and you can keep the chains moving. But when you shoot yourself in the foot and you go from 2nd and manageable to 3rd and long in the snap of a finger, that's how you end up punting. The Bears cannot afford to do that. They do it constantly. And hopefully this is the year where we stop seeing that happen on such a regular basis. There was hope that this is the kind of stuff that Ben Johnson would smoke out and get rid of with how he was handling spring practices. And now we're actually seeing the results on the field. And that's the type of stuff that can translate to the regular season. That's the type of stuff I'm excited about. I mean, look, you love to see Luther Burden crashing down, blocking hard. You love to see the run scheme looking like the Bears were running their 5th, 6th, and 7th string running backs. And yet they had that level of success. There was no DeAndre Swift. There was no Kyle Monangai. There was no Roschon Johnson. There was no Travis Homer. Any of what is the projected 4 running backs on the 53, none of them played. And the Bears still were able to run the ball 40 some times in that game for like 170 yards. So while they didn't have 5-6 yards a carry, they still had a productive run scheme. The entire passing game looked good. The defense looked good. Everything looked good in that game. So you got to love it. But again, that doesn't necessarily translate to the regular season. What does translate is how the Bears operate. And the Bears' operation against Buffalo was awesome. So that was actually what I was, not that the team could have won 45-0 if Ben didn't give the Bills mercy and take a knee. That's fun. You love it. Sure. But the thing I take away the most from that game is how the Bears are operating and how those stupid, self-inflicted mistakes, hopefully, are mostly weeded out, and the Bears are moving forward and not shooting themselves in the foot and moving backwards. So the one thing I want to do on today's monologue to kind of tell you where I'm at with this roster and with this team is I've got a 53-man roster projection coming out at Windy City Gridiron later this week. The Bears' final cutdown day is this upcoming Tuesday. So I wanted to kind of go through where I'm at with this roster. You can check that article out on Windy City Gridiron in a couple of days. You're going to hear a lot of the same stuff from here, but I wanted to share. So I'm going to start with some of the more obvious things and work my way through. We're going to start on the defensive side. Well, we'll start with special teams. First of all, special teams, really straightforward. Jonathan Kim could not push Cairo Santos. You've got your 3 specialists there. It's all pretty straightforward. I will say I haven't loved what I've seen from Tory Taylor this preseason. Look, massive foot. He's booming 55-yard punts regularly, but the couple opportunities he's had to pin, he has failed to pin. And that's why Tory Taylor was a 4th-round pick. Not that he could boom 55-yard punts. You can find punters that can boom 55-yard punts as a UDFA, as free agents. Tory Taylor's ability was supposed to be not just inside the 20, but get offenses inside the 10. That was his goal. That was his skill, the way he was able to get those footballs to bounce and not roll into the end zone. We didn't see that as often as we wanted to last year. We haven't seen it in this preseason. He really needs to start doing that to justify being a 4th-round pick. And I know we could sit there and say, oh, who cares? It's a 4th. No, 4th-round picks. You can have a lot of quality contributors as 4th-round picks. You can find NFL starters as 4th-round picks. This was not Trenton Gill, 7th-round pick. Why are we arguing about a 7th-round pick kind of thing? This is a 4th-round pick. Tory Taylor needs to live up to it. And that's going to mean not just inside the 20. Most punters can get that inside the 20. You tell a punter to pin someone at the 15, they're not going to have a hard time doing it. You tell a punter to pin someone inside the 5 at like the 4-yard line, they're going to end up in the end zone frequently. So that is a big difference there. We need to see that more from Tory Taylor. But again, the special teams, pretty straightforward. In the secondary, the safeties, I don't think this could be any more straightforward. You got your 2 starters with Byard and Brisker, and of course the 2 backups with Jonathan Owens and Elijah Hicks. Haven't really seen anything from the other safeties on the roster to make you think that they are going to step up and push any of these guys for a spot on the 53. I think they carry 4 safeties. I think that's pretty straightforward. The cornerback situation in the secondary there, a lot more interesting, and I'm curious how the Bears end up utilizing this. We're still waiting to hear some kind of word on Terrell Smith, but we're assuming Terrell Smith's out for the year. That's really unfortunate. So how is the depth going to look? We know the starters, especially with Terrell Smith out. You would certainly think Tyreek Stevenson is going to be one of the starters with Kyler Gordon and Jalen Johnson. But how is it going to work with the backups in that area? Because the Bears have a lot of cornerbacks on their roster, and a lot of guys have been looking pretty decent in the preseason. But basically, the way I think this works out with the cornerback situation is I think first of all, Josh Blackwell, that we don't even need to discuss. Josh Blackwell is your backup nickel. I think that is cornerback number 4. I think they're going to keep 6. Terrell Smith's going to go to IR. I think Za Frazier is also a guy that you're probably going to see on some sort of list. They can put him on the failed to report list, which would make a lot of sense. He's been dealing with some sort of personal issue. We've not gotten any kind of straight answer as to what's going on with him. Obviously, you would think it's something pretty darn serious at this point. He's missed a month of camp. We don't know what's going on there. We don't know if this is some sort of injury, some sort of illness, whatever it might be. Can he go on the non-football injury list? Can he go on the failed to report list? The problem with the failed to report list is you don't get paid. Don't receive any paycheck if you're on the failed to report list. I don't know if the Bears want to do that to him, assuming everything is amicable here right now. So maybe they come up with some sort of injury and he ends up on the IR as well. But I assume Za Frazier is going to not be on the 53 here to start. I'm not saying they're going to release him, but they're going to figure out some list they can put him on to put him aside. And I assume his 2025 season at this point is lost. We'll see if Za Frazier can do anything in 2026, which being he's a significantly older rookie anyway, that really is probably not going to work out as a draft pick. That's unfortunate. These things happen. It's not anything to, crush Ryan Poles about. And I'll crush Ryan Poles about plenty. So there's your 4 corners. I do think Nashon Wright is going to get a spot. He's popped a lot. The Bears front office and coaches have talked about him. I think Nick McLeod is also going to be one of your 6 cornerbacks on the 53. Nick can play inside and outside. He's got some versatility there. He's a veteran. I think they probably end up with McLeod. One of those things where you see is there a young guy that can come up and take that spot? You'd much rather have the really young guy, the 22-year-old. But I don't think the Bears have that on the roster, especially with the Smith injury and the Frazier situation. So I think those are your 6 corners. I think they end up taking, so that's 10 defensive backs, assuming they're going to have 25 on defense, 25 on offense. Let's move to linebackers, another straightforward group. You're going to have the starters with Edwards and Edmonds. You're going to have the Sam LB Free. That's going to be Noah Sewell. Ruben Hippolyte is going to be on there, and so is Amen. And I'm not going to try and pronounce his last name. I fail all the time. I'm sorry to the Amen fans. He's a good special teams player. He's going to be on this roster as a linebacker. There's your 5 linebackers. Let's look at the defensive line. I think the defensive line is more straightforward than I thought it was going to be. When you look at the defensive tackle situation, you got Grady Jarrett, you got Andrew Billings, you got Javon Dexter, you got Shamar Turner. I think those 4 are pretty straightforward. I think Chris Williams is going to make the 53 as the Bears' 5th defensive tackle. I think Jonathan Ford can probably go to the practice squad. He was on the Packers practice squad last year. I think Zach Pickens gets cut and the Bears do not retain him on the practice squad. I think this is the end of the road for Zach Pickens. I think they keep 5 defensive ends as well. I think you're going to see Montez Sweat and obviously Odabengo. I think those are going to be your starters. Austin Booker is going to be your 3rd defensive end. And the question is, how much of the success we've seen in the preseason will translate to the regular season? Little risky, I still think, despite Booker's strong performances, about where him being your only viable backup, because I think Dominique Robinson is going to make it. As the 5th defensive end, I'm not 100% certain. Obviously, you got Tano there. Not a big fan of him, but he's got ties to Dennis Allen, Daniel Hardy, probably more of a special teams guy. One of those 2 guys is going to be the 5th defensive end. I would assume maybe Hardy ends up on the practice squad, and the Dennis Allen familiarity is what ends up with a spot on the 53 there. But again, Could the Bears get a veteran there? We might talk about that a little bit later because the defensive end spot is not great. Let's jump over to the offensive side of the ball. Austin Reed to the practice squad, 3 quarterbacks on the 53-man roster. I think that's pretty straightforward. As I mentioned about 5 minutes ago, I think the running back room is straightforward. Ian Wheeler fans, I'm sorry. I think he ends up on the practice squad again. And look, what I saw from Ian Wheeler in this preseason in these 2 games, he ran well, but he ran largely against the 3s and the 4s and didn't show me anything dynamic. He was better than the players he went up against. He didn't show anything dynamic. Like Luther Burden, when you saw Luther Burden going against the 2s and the 3s, it was clear that he was, in essence, a man against boys. He was far more talented than the players he was going up against. I didn't see that with Ian Wheeler. I just saw that Ian Wheeler was better than them, where, like you said, those with the 3s and the 4s, maybe Ian Wheeler is the 2s. He's not that gap that you see with Luther Burden against the players he's up against. So Ian Wheeler, to me, is a guy that I don't know if he translates to being a contributor on Sundays, at least right now. Maybe another year recovering from that knee injury, gets a little more of that explosiveness back in his legs, and maybe there's something there in 2026. I just think it's probably practice squad for Ian Wheeler and those 4 running backs, Monangai, Homer, and then, of course, Roshan and Swift are your 4 running backs. The one surprise I could see, Roshan just hasn't been able to stay on the field again. It's not even concussions this time. He's dealing with like a foot issue. Maybe the Bears decide that Roshan isn't a guy for them because he can't stay on the field. Maybe a veteran running back is someone they pick up off the heap during the waiver wire process. Tight ends, even though they're going to run a lot of 12, I don't think a 4th tight end stepped up and took that spot on the 53. So I think 3 tight ends, obviously Loveland and Kmet. And then I think you're going to see Durham Smythe. And I think that's what you're going to see from the tight end spot. And if one of those top 2 guys gets hurt, I think the Bears just shift to more 11 personnel and put the 12 personnel on the shelf until both their guys can get healthy. A couple more position groups to do. Wide receiver. Again, I think it's pretty straightforward. I think a lot of people keep arguing, and I did early on as well, about who's going to be the 6th wide receiver on the 53-man roster. My suggestion is nobody. I think they keep 5 wide receivers. The top 4 guys are obvious, and Devin Duvernay as the returner, as the 5th wide receiver, what you're going to see there. So let's finish here before we get to Bobby Peters with the offensive line. I think the offensive line is interesting. We know the 4 guys that are starting across the front. As for the other left tackle position, I think it's going to be Braxton Jones. Braxton Jones has certainly not looked particularly good, but at the same time, the other guys have not looked particularly good either. We'll get through this as we go through the offensive line. I'm not going to, as we get through the guys on the offensive line, because I'm saying 10 offensive linemen are going to be on the initial 53. I think that'll get adjusted within the first week or 2, but I think you're going to see 10 offensive linemen on the 53. You're going to see those 4 starters. Braxton Jones makes the 5th starter. The reason Braxton Jones starts is because nobody took the job from him. I think when you're talking about rookies and young players like Amagaji and Theo Benedict and Ozzie Trapillo, they need to take that job. They need to go out there and win and say, I am definitely the best person for this job. And I don't think any 3 of them did. I do think all 3 of them will make the 53-man roster, but I think Braxton Jones kind of by default makes the 53-man roster. Karan Amagaji, I'm basically putting as basically the last offensive lineman that makes this roster. He had a really poor PFF grade against Buffalo. I thought he played better than that. But at the same time, his technique and so he has issues. I don't think Amagaji has it. Maybe the Bears don't think he is either, and it's possible he gets cut. I think he is going to stay on the 53, basically kind of be the 52nd or 53rd guy that makes this roster. But I do think they hold on to him because he is toolsy, and maybe Dan Rochar with more than one training camp, maybe he can work with him and get something out of him. I think Amagaji, though, if he sees the field this year, there's probably some serious injuries going on. I think Amagaji, other than like maybe special teams, I don't think we're going to see much of Amagaji this year. I do think he can sneak onto the 53. Ozzie Trapillo, just not quite having it at left tackle. Like I said in some articles, I thought he was fine against Miami in preseason game number 1, but he was going against 3s and 4s. He played in the second half. We needed to see Trapillo play better than that. We needed to see like Luther Burden dominate those type of players. Trapillo didn't do that. He was just a guy who did his job, and it was fine. That's not good enough to step up and take the left tackle job from Braxton Jones. The Bears have been working him a lot at right tackle, so you got to figure Trapillo settling in and it could be one of those things where Benedict is the backup left tackle and Trapillo is the backup right tackle. Maybe they don't have a swing tackle this year, so it'll be interesting because with Theo Benedict, obviously the Bears loved what he did, and he did. He played really well this training camp and this preseason, but when he got chances with the ones and was going up against elite competition, you saw that there was a gap there still. So Theo Benedict earns a spot on the 53-man roster, and that's going to be something that's really exciting for him and for the team. But in terms of actually pushing Braxton Jones, I don't see it. I also think they're going to spend a lot more time working Benedict in his guard because it's just hard to project him as a long-term tackle with his length issues. He's got very short arms. So I think maybe start working him more as a guard, kind of in the Matt Pryor role. Now, obviously, hopefully doesn't start like Matt Pryor did most of the season, but Matt Pryor role where you can back up left tackle and interior, work him more at guard, and then you can sit there and see in 2026, 2027, is Theo Benedict a legitimate guard that can at least be on the roster as a backup, maybe even eventually push as a starter when Jonah Jackson and Joe Thuney are no longer on this roster. It'll be interesting to see what happens with Benedict. But I think, again, you're going to see with the starting 5, you'll see Amagaji, you'll see Trapillo, and you'll see Benedict. That's 3. And I'm going to put 2 more guys in there. Ryan Bates has pretty much exclusively been the team's backup center. I think that'll be the spot there. You'll see a 3rd center, either Ricky Stromberg or Doug Kramer, probably on the practice squad. I would assume it's going to be Doug Kramer at this point, but he's been banged up during training camp. We'll see. Not that big of a deal either way, but you'll see a 3rd center there. And I think Luke Newman, now I was critical of the pick. I didn't like what I saw on his collegiate tape. I didn't think he had the necessary strength to do what he needed to do at the NFL level, but I liked what I saw from him in the preseason. He doesn't give up pressures, pass blocking, doesn't have a lot of strength, doesn't really move a guy off the line of scrimmage, but absolutely worth a spot on the 53-man roster. So I think those are the 53 guys that you are going to see get announced as the Chicago Bears starters, or as the Chicago Bears roster next week on Tuesday when the Bears make their final cut. So that's what I've seen from this preseason and this training camp. I'm excited that we are just a couple weeks away from regular season Chicago Bears football. It has been too long, and it is exciting that it is almost here. So we're going to bring on Bobby Peters next. This is Bill Zimmerman, Bears Banter. We'll be right back. Welcome back into the podcast. I am excited for this guest. He has been pretty much everywhere this entire offseason, not just earlier this offseason on Second City Gridiron with Jeff and Lester, but you've seen him on some big-time podcasts across the league this summer talking about Ben Johnson and his offense, because he has studied Ben Johnson's offense along with other offensive minds across the league. He is Bobby Peters. You can get his content on Alert the Post. Make sure you check out his stuff there. And of course, he is an author. He is a coach. He puts together manuals of offenses in the league that you can study and you can examine. And of course, he's got a couple on Ben Johnson as well, which we will talk about during this interview. He joins me now. Bobby, Bill Zimmerman, how you doing?
Pretty good, Bill. Excited to chat with you.
I'm excited to have you on because, look, we have been just desperate for a guy like this to be a member of the Chicago Bears coaching staff. Of course, Ben Johnson leading this Bears coaching staff, just a creative offensive mind. I mean, I do think it's funny, like John Shoup is one of his mentors, and John Shoup is not thought of highly in Bears circles with his offensive coordinator efforts, 20 years ago or so. But we put that aside, because what I do love about Ben Johnson is how he seems to take concepts from so many different offenses. I want to get into you about that. But before we get into Ben Johnson's offense, I want to talk about the Buffalo Bills game, because look, 38-0 could have been 45-0 if they didn't let the foot off the gas. That's all great. And I want to ask what you saw, what stood out for you in that game. But I want to tell you what stood out the most for me, because what's been so frustrating about this Bears team is how often they shoot themselves in the foot with a procedural penalty, with a false start, delay a game, something in the pre-snap that messes up the play. They go from second and short to second and long, incomplete pass, third and long, and now they're punting. Like, we've seen them shoot themselves in the foot, but I saw a really clean operation, getting to the line of scrimmage with plenty of time, a time to make adjustments, whatever they needed to do. Not a lot of procedural penalties. They had the one play at the end of the half was kind of a mess, 2 procedural penalties. Bagents gets sacked. But other than that, for the most part, I think there was one false start, and that was it. They had a crisp operation. They looked like a professional football team. And I know Ben Johnson's been hammering that all spring, but I think you're finally seeing the importance of that and the results of that on the field. Finally, we saw that against Buffalo.
Yeah, Bill, I think that's probably the best thing you can take away from the game, right? Like, obviously preseason results, I mean, we've seen over the years, can be fool's gold, one way. And then obviously, you get those 0-3, 0-4 teams that end up having good regular seasons. So taking the score, can be very misleading. But yeah, I think what you're hitting the nail on the head with is the pre-snap operation, right? We're getting the play call in, we're getting the guys to the line of scrimmage quickly so that, if we want to make a check at the line of scrimmage, or if we want to use a dummy cadence or something, it gives the offense time, and we're not scrambling there. And also too, it kind of clears the play calling process when you're getting that play in early. It's less back and forth, when that play clock is winding it down. It just shows that the Bears know what they're doing. So no, I think that's probably the best thing to take away. And then one of my biggest takeaways outside of that was they just seem to be playing fast and playing confident. Guys know their assignments. Guys were in the right spots. Offensive lineman was getting off the ball quickly. They were working up to the right players on their double team combinations. It looked like they knew what they were doing.
Yeah, look, and based on the Shane Waldron offense last year, that was a nice change of pace. So let me ask you about this, and that's the buy-in, because I think, Ben Johnson's been hammering that, and I'm going to use Luther Burden as the perfect example, obvious example as well, but some of the blocks he made where you sit there, the no block, no rock concept, and Burden, look, Ryan Poles admitted it on the broadcast that early in training camp, he was kind of, I don't know if I really want to buy into this aspect of it, but now you're seeing Burden. You don't block like that unless you're having some sort of, joy, going across and hitting guys like that. That's not just, well, I guess that's my assignment, I need to do it. But that was a full buy-in. I mean, his hit on Hamlin was great. The way he operated in the passing game as well. Burden was a really exciting guy for me, and a great example of that. I think these players are really buying into Ben Johnson, which means they believe in Ben Johnson, which, based on where they were with his previous coaching staff, could be an absolutely huge boost from a confidence standpoint in how they operate moving forward.
Yeah, I think those blocks obviously have made their fair share of rounds in the media the last few days. And obviously Greg Olsen calling it out on the broadcast, that's elite broadcasting. I can't get enough of Greg Olsen.
He's great
these days. And it's always a joy when he's calling games, but no, I think even coaches that I've talked to at all levels the last couple of days here, you cannot understate the importance of what we saw from Luther Burden blocking, because like you said, it illustrates extreme levels of buy-in, but then also too, when teammates see that, when the offensive line sees that, when the running backs see that, I mean, it's good. That's what good football teams do. And we saw that with Detroit over the last few years, right? I mean, you got everybody's buying in, everybody's doing their job on every single play, even if they're not getting the football. And as a coach, when you see a dude blocking like that, I mean, Kyle Shanahan with the Niners for years, with a guy like Juwan Jennings, kind of making his hay doing stuff like this in the run game, he finds opportunities for guys like this in the pass game, right? I think there was a good example of that was that it was kind of what I call a keeper action. So Caleb Williams was faking a run play one way, coming back the other, or I don't think it was Caleb, I think it was Bagent at this point, coming back the other way, hitting Luther Burden in the flat quick, and he made a guy miss. That's the type of play you draw up for a guy who's blocking well, because that play requires, the run fake requires that Z receiver to dig out the secondary support on that side of the field. And if you just slobber knock somebody down by the goal line on the last drive, that strong safety is going to fit the run quick because he's like, oh, shoot, Luther Burden's coming to crack me again. He's going to dive into the box, and now there's no flat defender, and he gets as open as he did because of the buy-in from the previous drive. So stuff like that just snowballs. And I know everybody, like I said, Greg Olsen mentioned on the broadcast, people in the media have been talking about it, but it really can't be understated how important something like that can be for the Bears' success this year.
Yeah, and I think that's a great lead into kind of talking about play design and play calling, play sequencing and all that, which Ben Johnson, is elite at doing that kind of stuff. And I want to get into that. But I think that's a great lead in for this is about buying in at all aspects. And that opens up other aspects of the offense, because I think a lot of times as Bears fans, we just sit there and go, oh, I don't want them to run the ball on 2nd and 10. It's going to set up, 3rd and long, these kind of things, like the basic stuff that we saw Luke Getsy do, that we saw Shane Waldron, even Thomas Brown do, what we've seen these offenses do, where the play calling, it doesn't seem to have a purpose. It's just, well, it's first down, we should run. It's second and, we should run, or like it doesn't seem like there's a goal other than let me call some plays and see if we can gain some yards and eventually score. With Ben Johnson, like you're talking about, that play doesn't work unless that they go, oh, Luther Burden's blocking here. But if, they need that to make that fake work. They need everything to put in together. So talk a little bit about Ben Johnson and his offensive concepts and what you saw in Detroit, what you've seen carrying over so far. I know it's just preseason, or even in practice with some of the videos, what you've seen carrying over here, because I think that's an interesting point of saying that Ben Johnson has a goal in mind. And obviously the goal is a touchdown, but what he wants to do, what he wants to set up from previous drives to make future drives work, how everything comes together, and it's not just a series of plays being called with really no rhyme or reason.
Yeah, I think on game day there are two different categories or large picture ideas that play callers need to be good at. It's the art of the play calling and the design of the play calling, right? So when we talk about the design of it, right? Like the science side of it, designing plays that get guys open, right? That's stuff you do during the week. You put stuff together. You have to be forward thinking with that process. And obviously with Ben Johnson, we've all seen the highlights of not even just the trick plays, but guys wide open running down the field, those run plays. I know you were talking about run plays on 2nd down, but I mean, Ben Johnson is one of the most aggressive coaches when it comes to running the ball, like on 3rd downs. But the difference is he's running them into good looks, right? We're seeing defensive, wide defensive edges, defensive tackles that are bumped out as well. So you can run certain run plays into those looks and pick up 10 yards, no problem. So Bears fans don't think you're getting away from that quite yet, but it's gonna look better. So you got the design of the play, right? It's got to look good on the whiteboard, but then also there's the art of the play calling. And this is something that I think Matt Nagy, this is kind of what separated Matt Nagy from being, a good OC in Kansas City, a good quarterback coach versus calling plays on a Sunday, is the art of it, is sequencing and building all that stuff together. Like that example that we just talked about, right? If the defense isn't going to believe Luther Burden's going to dig out that safety, that play, that keeper concept that you're calling on the next drive isn't going to work. So Ben Johnson has shown his, obviously that was a preseason game, but, even going back to the last few years in Detroit, he has shown that he can do both of those at a very high level.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up Nagy, because that was one of the things I think it drove a lot of, especially like some of the Nagy's decisions in the red zone. There was a lot of times it looked like the plays made sense. There was good spacing, nothing was perfect, but especially early on, it seemed like Nagy's plays made a lot of sense and they should work. But when do you call them? And, what is the right time to do this? And again, what you can do early in games to set up later in games and catch a defense off guard, things like that. And I think that's, you bring that up about the art of play calling. And I think that's really interesting. And I think that's something that is a challenge for even great offensive coordinators, is knowing exactly how to set everything up and how to marry everything together. So if you can kind of go into a little more detail as to what Ben Johnson does from the art of play calling, so to speak, that, even if you have a couple examples, things he may have done in Detroit regularly, that makes him so unique and so special, on that Sunday afternoon.
Yeah, I think when I think of the art of play calling, when it comes to Ben Johnson specifically, a couple things come to mind are in the red zone, right? Like you said, Matt Nagy, other coaches we've seen have good designer pass concepts that you can get guys open in the red zone, right? But sometimes you got to be able to just, you got to just be able to run the football down in the red zone, and you just have to be able to do it. And so the science design side of it, okay, we're seeing a loaded box. How do we run away from an unblocked defender in a way that we can still, pick up either a first down in the red zone, or we can score, right? And so there's the design of it, but then there's the willingness and ability to call those plays down there instead of, those fancy pass concepts that you've designed during the week or even in the off season. And there are times the Lions will run the ball 3-4 straight times when they get into the red zone, and they end up scoring on like third or fourth and goal. But it's that persistency and that understanding of, hey, we have an advantage down here. We like our blocking angles that we can create against their fronts. We might have a pass concept we like, but you know what? We know if we get 3 or 4 cracks at this, we can score doing it this way. And kind of having that big picture understanding of things. And then also too, like understanding your personnel versus the defensive personnel, right? Like, how many times did we see, like Aaron Donald or somebody of that sort, right, ruin a Bears game plan because, we just, he beat the left tackle, or he beat the left guard on a pass rush. And it's like, well, the plan just wasn't there, right? We didn't account for that defender. So stuff like that, taking personnel into account is something that he's done really well over his tenure in Detroit too.
Yeah, and you brought up personnel, and that was actually the next place I wanted to go. I wanted to talk about that because this dates back to Mitch Trubisky. Can you build an offense that brings out a player's strengths? And while I think there were other issues with Mitch Trubisky, clearly as he left Chicago, that his career hasn't panned out, I'm sure, like he hoped or like Bears fans thought it might have worked out for him. But building an offense for player strengths, that was one of the things we heard criticisms of Matt Nagy regularly, that Matt Nagy had his concepts and his offense, and he wanted to just, if it was a square peg in a round hole, tough, because this is his offense and that's the way he wanted to run things. But, Ben has talked about often about making sure his offense is built around his players' strengths. So, if you can kind of go into how you can do that and the types of strengths that maybe the players, the Bears skill set players have, where you can see something that Ben Johnson can do to help, highlight them more in the offense.
That's what I'm going to be looking for in September and even early October here, right? I mean, week 1, week 2, it's not going to be finalized because we're not seeing these guys playing a game yet in his system. So it's going to take a few weeks. And Ben Johnson has shown, if you go back to the Lions 22 tape, their offense from 22 to 23 to even 24, week to week, month to month, season to season, he's constantly evolving it, fitting to different things. He's like, oh, this guy can do this. Let's try to do it with, let's try to feature that this week, 3 or 4 times more than we did the week before, So I think that's something that we're all going to find out together here over the first month or 2 of the season. But something I want to touch on too, talking about players' strengths and putting players in good positions to succeed, is something that Ben Johnson does really well. Is like, it's a buzzword, right? We hear marry the run and the pass, but he does it just as well, if not better, than most of the top play callers in the NFL. And that's I know we're talking a lot about Matt Nagy here, even though he hasn't coached the team in a few years. But we're comparing the offensive guru types, right?
Right.
So
exactly.
So Nagy, there was almost zero correlation between the Bears' run game and their play action and their drop back looks. Outside of a few RPOs that obviously they're gonna kind of look the same when you're doing it, but. There was little to no marriage there, and defenses could tee off on certain looks, right? Certain down and distance looks, certain personnel packages, certain formation giveaways were huge under Matt Nagy. So I think that true marriage of run and pass, and like we talked about before, that willingness, hey, our outside zone or our duo has been hitting really well, on the last drive or two. We're just going to call it 5-6 times in a row. And that willingness to kind of marry everything together and seeing the offense as an entire system, not, your run plays, your play action, your drop back, kind of seeing it all together is something he does really well. And I'm really excited to see how it kind of unfolds here.
Yeah. So let's talk about marrying the run and Ben Johnson's run concepts, what he wants to do in the running game, because, and I'm not going to say specifically who this person is because it was told to me off the record, but I do know there was he's a television analyst, but he's well known. Everyone knows who he is. And Matt Nagy actually brought him in to consult on the run game because he wanted to improve his run game. And they're having this conversation, and the guy says, "You're like, do you want to run the football?" He's like, yeah, I want to run the football. That's why you're here. It's like, no, do you want to run the football? He's like, yeah, I want to run the football. And Matt, and he says, I don't believe you. I don't think you want to run the football. You just want the run game to work, but you don't want to run the football. Running the football is an attitude. It's a lot more than just calling a running play. You need to actually run the football. And that's certainly something Ben Johnson wants to do. How important blocking is, not just for the 5 guys up front, but for the all 10 guys. So kind of talk about Ben Johnson's desire to run the football and what his what his goals are in the run game, because we were with the Shanahan running concepts and all these different running concepts. What is Ben Johnson's run game?
So the run game starts with the outside zone or the mid zone concept. So what that requires is the offensive line. They're all, whether it be a single block or a double team combination up to the second level, depending on the front, will kind of dictate some of those assignments. Is you'll get the offensive lineman trying to reach the play side shoulder, the play side armpit of the defender across from them. And that's what that does is it really forces the defense, it forces them to move laterally while still getting vertical on their run fits. And the big thing too, like we talked about marrying everything together, that's kind of the starting point for his run game, because the amount of play action protections and play action pass concepts you can get off to that are pretty close to endless. And Ben Johnson understands that, and you can see that marriage together. So starting with the run scheme is kind of where things start and end. Now, obviously that's not the entire gamut of his run scheme. And he does a really good job. And in my books, I outline a lot of my favorite ones. Is he'll get really creative with different designs of different gap schemes to try to find leverage for the offensive line, to try to bring an extra receiver in to block maybe a secondary support defender at the line of scrimmage or something of that sort. He just does a lot of creative stuff within the gap family of concepts too, to really try to create, an explosive in the run game.
All right. Well, while we're talking about Ben Johnson's run concepts, let's talk about the goals in the run blocking scheme that Ben Johnson wants to run. We talk about the Detroit Lions offensive line and how elite it was as a group and as a unit. And obviously we know offensive lines, they need to be cohesive to really function well. So what is it about Ben Johnson's concepts? We'll do pass blocking as well after this, but just let's focus on the running game concepts in terms of blocking that makes what he does so good in the run game, where, he's basically putting offensive linemen in a position to be able to make those blocks they need to make, which didn't necessarily always happen the last couple of years in Chicago.
Yeah, I think, we talk about, obviously he has a very creative run game. And I think what does that mean? And how does that impact the offensive line and the tight ends with their blocking schemes? Well, what it does is, whether it be a zone run or a gap run, it allows these guys to sit on their double teams longer, because we're working to a linebacker that might be further behind the play as opposed to pushing to one that's on the front side. So it allows us to take that combination and work it for an extra second or two while that backer is trying to scrape over the top. And he does that, based, game plan specific to how they're attacking the specific defense, but also he's creative in how he adjusts the different blocking schemes and adds misdirection to it too. So when we talk about creativity in the run game, at the end of the day, we need to be doing that. We need to be creating leverage for the offensive line so that, it's not like off a double team, we're trying to, reach further forward to get to a play side linebacker that's faster than our guard, who's probably already filled his hole in time, as opposed to working to a linebacker who's trying to scrape over the top and he kind of meets our guard, as he's coming off the combination block. So the timing looks really well. So that's something that kind of separates him. There's probably a handful of offensive coaches that really do that well in the NFL, but Ben Johnson is one of the few that gets there with a lot of different creative gap schemes within his disposal.
Yeah, because I think the one thing for me as a former high school offensive lineman, when I had an assignment where I knew I was going to have to get out the second level and get a linebacker or whatever, and I knew I had to, seal him off if the play is coming to my left side, I know I had to seal him off from the left, and he's already like a gap over, a gap and a half over, and I have to reach all the way to the left to try and get him. Like I'm sitting there in my 3-point stance going, I'm screwed. Right. Like, and I think we talked about that speed option with the Colts last season where everything just blew up. But I remember looking at that play pre-snap and trying to figure out who the offensive line's assignments are. And the way the Colts had lined up, like the offensive line was screwed. Like that play was dead on arrival because you just looked at it and went, this is not going to be the whatever run concept to the left they were going to do was going to fail miserably. Like, and I sit there and I think of that from an offensive lineman's perspective, where you kind of just know before the play even starts, you're like, I'm not, this guy's too fast for me. I'm not going to be able to get as far to the left as I need to do to seal off that backer and make this play work. And that's a frustrating place to be in. And I know for a fact that have been offensive linemen over the last couple of years that have felt that from time to time, where they just felt like the concept was doomed before the play was even snapped because of the Bears not running into the right spot, not having the right play called, not having the right blocking scheme called. So I think that's one thing that Ben Johnson does really well. And we talked about it with the skill position players, about putting players in a position to succeed, but also about putting offensive linemen in a position to succeed and making sure, like you said, they can scrape, they can get to the second level, they can get the backers that they need to get to. Because if you're not successfully blocking at the second level, those guys are going to come up and fill the gaps, and the running play is not going to go anywhere.
Yep, exactly.
So, like, when we talk about doing that in the running game, let's talk about that in the passing game, because I know obviously there's different concepts that you can have, passing the football and how to keep Caleb Williams upright and protected. What are some of the interesting things you've seen? I think pass blocking is a little more straightforward, but what have you seen with Ben Johnson's pass blocking concepts in terms of how he's going to make that pass game go?
Yeah, with respect to his protections that he uses, both drop back and the play action game, he's very multiple in what he does, and I think that's the way to combat what modern defenses are trying to do to offenses. Is they're trying to create ways to keep the running back in protection while only bringing 4 rushers, which you hear the term creeper or simulated pressure often, right? That's kind of the goal of a lot of that stuff for defenses. And the other thing too is, can we get a free runner on the quarterback? Can we get someone whether only rushing 5 or even bringing 6 if we have to get a free rusher at the quarterback. And, when defensive coordinators know, that your protection, within 80 or 90% probability is going to be one of 2 different things, they can game some of this stuff up and they can take chances like that. Right. But if you have a deep variety in the different ways that you can call different protections like Ben Johnson does, the probability shrinks drastically. And what that does for defensive coordinators is if they aren't positive that they can get or have a good chance of getting somebody free on the quarterback by bringing 5 or 6, if there's a good chance the offense can pick that up, they're going to get gashed on the back end, right? You got one-on-one matchups, you got guys playing with poor leverage, and say somebody misses a tackle, there's no safety help, they're gone, they're taking it to the house. So they're a lot less likely to bring those types of pressures if they know that they're not going to get home with them. And that's what Ben Johnson does as a play caller. He has so many different ways, whether it be in the drop back game or the play action game, to pick these different pressures up and dissuade defenses from even bringing these looks in the first place. So that's when I study him and all the different stuff. I mean, he has some old school protections too, like some old school Sean Payton stutter pass protection where they're faking counters. So you got a guard kicking out the defensive end. You're keeping your backside tight ends to kind of seal the backside of it. So just different stuff like that. He probably called that maybe 10 or 20 times last year just to kind of mix it in. And then that's just one example, right? He's got a bunch of different ones. And, if you want to get into that, shoot me a message on Twitter and I can rant to you on there, but we'd be here for a few hours if I was ranting on all the different stuff he does. But no, that at its core, I think, is what makes his pass protection plans really successful.
Well, and you talked about play action a couple times during this interview. So let's talk about play action, its importance to the offense, and how Ben Johnson utilizes it. Because, we've talked about, we've seen Caleb Williams getting more under center this year to help, amplify the play action game, what they can do with that, the importance of trying to just gain that half step on the defense, all the things the play action can do, which a lot of Bears fans frustrated that is not something we've seen the offense utilize much over the last few seasons. So, talk about play action a little bit in terms of how it can be utilized to accentuate an offense and how Ben Johnson particularly utilizes it.
Yeah, there's a few things that come to mind. And the first thing that popped into my head when you were talking is the dagger concept. And dagger concept off play action is one of my favorite concepts. So what it is your outside receiver is going to run that deep in cut, right? That 16 to 18 yard deep in. You're going to have somebody inside of him clearing out the safety, kind of running taking the top off the defense. And then you're going to have some sort of underneath control on that hook defender to try to draw the defense down, whether it be a shallow crossing route from the other side or the running back check releasing or a tight end chip blocking and then kind of getting out into that area, between the hash and the numbers. And he does that just about as well as anybody in recent history. And I know this name kind of, can bring some negative thoughts to Bears fans, but Mike Martz, greatest show on turf, and even with the Bears, I mean, his offense feasted on these deep dig cuts for years, and he's one of Ben Johnson's influences and kind of what he wants to do from a passing standpoint. And obviously, Martz had some ups and downs with the Bears, back in 2010 and 2011, but his thought process behind a lot of what he wants to do in the drop back pass game is stuff that good coaches nowadays can still take and learn lessons from. And the dagger concept is one of them that he had a ton of success with. And the other one too is, and actually John Gruden posted a video on X, I believe last night, kind of in his NFC North preview, talking about this, drawing it up on the whiteboard, is Ben Johnson's use of different ways to get to the high crossing concept. So high crossing concept is on the front side, we're taking one or two receivers and we're running vertical routes to kind of clear out the corner, clear out the safeties, clear out the nickel, whatever we're trying to do with the specific version of it. And then we're going to bring a deep crosser coming from the other side of the field as the primary receiver. Everybody in the league runs some sort of version of this. It's one of the most common play action routes. Ben Johnson has adapted it to his drop back game really well too. But one thing that separates him and his usage of it is his understanding of, okay, who are the danger defenders on this, right? If the defense is in a Tampa 2 and the Mike's running out of there, well, they can take away the high and the low there if they can get an extra defender to kind of help on the crossing route. Well, what do we do with our other receiver then? How do we readjust our check down distribution to replace that defender that helped on the main part of the concept? And Ben Johnson, some of his designs within this concept and then other concepts as well, he just has a tremendous understanding of the whole picture and how defenses are trying to stop him. And like I said before, week to week, month to month during the season, he's adjusting these plays to kind of respond to that in real time.
Yeah, and I think you talk about some of the ways he gets receivers open and gets some easy throws, and I think that's something that was really and mind-bogglingly missing last season, was making sure that those easy outlets were there for Caleb Williams, and that those weren't always there necessarily on some of those plays where it was just like, oh, well, he should have just been dumping off. And then when you go back and look at the play, you're like, to who? Like, where was that safety valve? Where was that outlet? And I think, we hear analysts on television and everything talk about all the time that Ben Johnson creates easy plays for the quarterback, gets those easy completions, builds up the confidence. Not every play is. He's going to still go intermediate middle. He's going to make some, he's going to have Caleb Williams try and make some of the more challenging throws as well. But also having those easy throws, those, obviously the goal is first downs. I'm not saying it's to generate statistics, but those stat builders, getting that completion percentage up, getting that confidence up. What's that?
Efficiency.
Yeah, efficiency. So one, how do you have an offense for a rookie that doesn't have those consistently? And two, how important is that to the Ben Johnson offense in terms of just making sure that those easy completions are worked in and regularly a part of the offense?
Oh, it's absolutely critical. I think, time and place, right? It's the art of play calling, kind of what we were talking before, right? You need your mix of those, but at the same time, like you said, there are times you have to push the ball down the field. You have to read out a coverage, right? But Ben Johnson understands time and place for both. And I think a great example of this is when we're looking at his game plans against Brian Flores defenses, which, so happens to be who the Bears play week 1, right? When we're looking at his game plans there, he did a ton of stuff. And I outline a lot of these in my game planning, my 23 game planning book, specific concepts for those weeks against those looks, right? Where, he's going to mug 6 or 7 guys up to the line of scrimmage. All right, what do? You can't read out those dagger concepts if you're getting those looks on the line of scrimmage because you can't block everybody, right? If they bring, certain pressure paths, or if they bring 6 of those guys, you're really putting a ton of stress on your offensive line. So what does he do? All right, so we take a 2x2 formation, right? So we got 2 receivers to each side, one of them being a tight end. He'll take that tight end, he'll fast motion him to the other side, and he'll just run a quick bubble screen. Now, what are we doing? We're forcing that safety from the other side of the field to be the third defender having to chase that action all the way down. That's an easy 8-10 yards, right? The quarterback's just catch and throwing. There's no reading. And just little stuff like that, he does really well. And then another concept, too, that I saw a ton against Minnesota the last few years, and I'm sure we'll see this year, and I actually saw a couple times when I was out at camp a couple weeks, too, is what I call the Z-curl concept. So it's basically, and Mark Trestman ran this a ton back in the day with actually a lot of success, too, is it's basically like a curl flat read, right? So you got a receiver running like a 10-yard stop route, a curl route, and then somebody in the flat. And then the other routes kind of distribute to occupy the danger defenders, right? And it's a simple read. It's a simple high-low, but it combats exactly how the Brian Flores defenses want to play, specifically specific to that defense. And that's a play call we saw a bunch from him in those matchups over the last few years. So, tailoring the game plans to find those easy completions against those different looks, right? Instead of putting your quarterback in a bad situation, forcing him to read something downfield that might take 3 or 4 seconds when you've got these pressure looks coming. It's just something that Ben Johnson does a good job of avoiding when he can.
All right, and last thing I want to ask here before I let you go on offensive concepts is Ben Johnson's use of motion. Because I think when you boil everything down and you ask someone what's the point of motion, they're going to sit there and say, well, if the defender goes with the motion player, they're in man, and if they stay put, they're in zone, and that gives that basic read to the quarterback. And while I think most football fans understand that there's that basic concept of motion, I think there's other aspects to it as well. So what can Ben Johnson, what does he do, and what does motion do in terms of helping, utilize an offense and create opportunities and advantages for an offense other than just kind of figuring out some basic, defensive information.
So I got two things to touch on to that. So the first example is one that we just talked about, right? That fast motioning the tight end across, getting that quick bubble screen against that specific look, right? We're quickly changing the math on the defense. We're going from a 2x2 to a 3x1, forcing the defense to adjust on the fly there, right? So that's a great example. And then the other one too is let's build on the dagger discussion that we were talking about, right? So one way defenses can combat this is kind of by cheating that flat defender back inside a little bit if they notice the route stems, right? So the flat defender can kind of jump down to that hook control, and then that allows the hook player to kind of get under that dig window, and the defense kind of cheat and take it away, right? So what does Ben Johnson do? So what he does is he'll take a tight end or a receiver and fast motion them across the field, or from the same side, he'll motion them away, and he'll spray them on what's called a rail route outside of the dig route to flush and pull that flat defender out of the way completely. So now we create a clean high-low on that hook defender, and that's an adjustment that I saw a ton from them last year, and I actually included a little breakdown of that in my Ben Johnson preview article on my website that I posted probably a month ago. I kind of go into a little more detail on that, but that's one specific way, right? Okay, we're dealing with this problem. The defense is cheating a defender further inside. How do we remove him from the play? Let's fast motion. Let's run him on a rail route. So that flat defender has to honor that, and we keep the exact same concept intact for the quarterbacks. We still got that high low coming for that dagger concept. So there's a lot of different ways, and the way he uses it, every week, like I said, I've had just an absolute, if you can't tell with the way I'm talking, I've had an absolute blast studying his offense the last 3 years. So when the Bears hired him back in January, being a Bears fan, I was absolutely ecstatic. So those are two good examples, and I can't wait to see how he's going to try to, continue that evolution this year.
All right, and last one for you, and this is probably kind of an impossible question, but being that you coach and you've installed offenses and all this, I think, especially now that we saw, Caleb Williams, whatever it was, 97 yards, whatever, on the first drive, right down the offense. Zacchaeus with the touchdown. Everyone's like, all right, Ben Johnson's offense. It's, all the install days are done. The Bears are clicking. Can't wait for the Vikings. So while, yes, I understand you have no idea how the Bears are going to play against Minnesota in some of those early games, but to you, in your mind, what are the odds that this offense can hit the ground running in September, or that there's still going to be growing pains? You're going to be going up against more elite defenses. You're going to go against the full defense and not just a few plays, and not just the kind of the skeleton defense where, teams don't want to give away too much in the preseason. Like, what are the odds that you think this offense can really click in September, or that it still may have growing pains and that this offense really may not start coming together until October, maybe even November?
So I think what fair expectations for us can be is the raising of the floor by a significant margin, right? We've talked about all the different offenses that we've watched over the years as Bears fans, and just shaking our head with complete disbelief at what we're seeing. I think a lot of that's going to be eliminated. I think what we saw, one of our takeaways from the Buffalo game in the preseason, is what that floor looks like, right? We're moving, our guys are playing fast. We're not putting guys in bad spots. We're fundamentally sound, right? There's still going to be some growing pains, like you said, but I think especially week one going up against Brian Flores, like, it's going to be a hyper specific game plan coming out of the gate for that defense. So, we don't want to, positive or negative, we don't want to take away too much from that, because that's not going to be the looks that the Bears are going to be seeing for the first 2 months of the year outside of that one matchup. But I think what we can expect is week 1, week 2, week 3, whatever, however many games into this we want to see, is that raising of that floor. The fundamentals are better. The designs are better, right? Is it going to translate to points? I certainly hope so, and I certainly believe so. But we're just going to have to see, our guys, our offensive linemen dropping left and right? Personnel-wise, our guys staying healthy. All that stuff's going to, obviously play a huge factor in their overall success. But I think the raising of the floor, especially early on with those little things that we're not used to seeing, I think is a more than fair expectation. And I think there is certainly a chance within that first month that this thing could catch fire and go, depending how quickly Caleb Williams catches on to the whole thing and how confident he is in what Ben's coaching him.
No, there's a lot of reason for excitement, Bobby, and you just laid out a lot of the reasons right there in the last 30, 35 minutes or so. So he is Bobby Peters, author, coach, and of course you can get all his content at Alert the Post. Make sure you check it out there. And Bobby, I know I said author, you've put together I know you've put together some manuals of many different coaching staffs over the years, but you do have some Ben Johnson stuff available on Amazon, correct? You have a couple manuals that Bears fans could pick up if they'd like.
Yeah, so the 2022 Complete Offensive Manual on the Lions is it's a great starting point, right? If you want to go concept by concept, okay, what has been the core of Ben Johnson's offense, right? Like I said, he evolves his offense every year. So in 2023, what I did was I wrote another book on his offense based on a game planning approach. So what I do is I go week to week. I pick 10 to 12 plays from each game that highlight how he adjusted his offense that week and how he's pushing the evolution forward. So I think both books go really well together if you really want to understand the full picture. Like I said, the 22 place is a good place to start if you're just you just want to get your feet wet with some of the X and O stuff. But yeah, no, that's probably both of those together are probably close to a little over 500 pages on him. And I thought really hard about writing another one about him this past offseason on the 24 season, because obviously the Lions did a ton of really good stuff there. But, obviously, I still have a day job, so I didn't have quite time to get to it. The other thing, too, is I'm really counting on doing another Ben Johnson book at the end of this year for the Bears. I mean, I said, I'm really excited. For the direction everything's headed here, and obviously growing up a Bears fan, I think I'll put a little extra juice in the study when it's my team. So yeah, those are the two places to go. Or those two books are, if you want to learn exactly what he's doing, if you want to get into the nuts and bolts of the stuff, those are great places to go.
That I didn't want to put you on the spot there, but that is great news that we might be looking for another Ben Johnson, Bobby Peters manual coming out after this season. So that's why you have guys like Bobby Peters on, and then you can realize how little you know about football because of how much Bobby knows. Bobby, thanks for so much time. It was a really good interview, and we are all looking forward to watching Ben Johnson's offense in 2025.
Thanks for having me on, Bill.
All right, there he is, Bobby Peters. That was a great interview. That is a lot of Ben Johnson to dissect. I think I'm probably actually going to go back and listen to this episode a couple times just to absorb everything Bobby had to say. And look, he puts it all out there about everything we can look for this season, everything that Ben Johnson is going to try and accomplish, what he's going to try and do in terms of play sequencing and setting up his offense to have more success in the second half, how the run games and pass games can be married together, the use of play action, the use of motion, all the things that can make an offense click. Lot of information there from Bobby Peters. He did a great job. If you want to know Ben Johnson and what he has seen so far and what's going to be coming in September, there you go. So make sure you check out all his stuff at Alert the Post. Now, we promised a mailbag. We haven't done a mailbag in a really long time. We did our Zach Pearson training camp previews in July. We didn't do a mailbag for that one. I'm pretty sure we did one when we had Herb Howard on in June after minicamp. But I mean, we're still talking about 2 months without a mailbag. So let's dive in. Let's start with Coach Dan, who asked, does Austin Booker's development / potential convince Poles to avoid exploring veteran options at edge? So I'll be honest, Dan, I'm sure Poles and probably Dennis Allen like this defensive end room more than I do. I hate this defensive end room. I really want Austin Booker to be DE4 this year. I really don't want him to be the third edge. And again, maybe he's ready to step up and be the third edge. But last year, while Austin Booker's rookie season was mostly quiet, to me, the more alarming thing when Austin Booker was on the field was not what he did in the pass rush. He was able to get a little pressure here or there. He wasn't inept at the pass rush. His run defense was awful, just absolutely awful. Basically, when Austin Booker was on the field, if the offense was going to run the football, they ran at Austin Booker. And they ran successfully at Austin Booker because he was the weak spot on the defense. So I love seeing him bust heads against Miami and sacking the quarterback multiple times. It looked, again, pretty good against Buffalo as well. Everyone looked good against Buffalo, but Austin Booker looked good against Buffalo as well. But the problem is, where is he on the run game? I highlighted it in an article after the Dolphins game. The rushing touchdown they had, was it Ali? I don't think it was Ali Gordon. Maybe it was Jalen Wright. The rushing touchdown they had, that was about an 8-10 yard touchdown. What happened on that play is Jalen Wright, there was the play was designed to go a certain spot to the right, and Jalen Wright, there was a little too much traffic there. Jalen Wright cut back to the left, and then found a seam and went straight up for the touchdown. Austin Booker penetrated. He was supposed to set the edge on his side. He penetrated too far into the backfield. And when he tried to crash down the line of scrimmage to make that play, he was too far behind the running back. He kind of dove at his ankles, couldn't make the play, touchdown. Austin Booker needs to be able to read that play out of the gate. No, it's a run. No, he's got to set the edge at the line of scrimmage and not penetrate. And if he crashes down and he's 2 yards further, 3 yards further back where he's supposed to be, rather than over penetrating, he makes that tackle. Jaren Wright gains a couple of yards, and that's it. That's the type of stuff we need Austin Booker to improve on if he's going to be out there for 50, 60% of the snaps as the team's third edge. He's got to improve in run defense. Now, I didn't watch Austin Booker a ton against Buffalo. I was trying to watch some other things. So I don't know exactly how well he did against the run against Buffalo. Obviously, Buffalo's offense didn't do much. So I'm sure if he was involved in run plays that they went pretty well. But we need to see him, Dan. We need to see him stop the run better. If he is not stopping the run better in practice, and I can't speak to that, obviously, Dennis Allen and those guys are the only ones who can speak to that. When he's out there, he's going to be a weak point again. Now, if he's improved on that, he can handle the third edge duties because he'll probably provide enough of a pass rush to get in the mix there. But if he's not doing it in the run game, he's not going to be able to be out there very much, and they're not going to have the kind of depth. Like with Dominique Robinson, I assume he's going to make this roster because there's just no other options at edge. He's had another good training camp and another good preseason, but it never translates to the regular season with this guy. Will it translate to the regular season this year? I hope so. But at this point in his fourth season, I have no hope that it's actually going to translate to the regular season. I assume he's going to be a ghost on Sundays as he's been the last few years, because this guy is an athletic specimen. Athletic specimens really shine when they're in training camp because their natural innate abilities is what really shines in those drills, and especially when pads are off and that kind of stuff. But when the pads come on, especially on Sundays when he's going up against ones, he's totally neutralized. So I don't have any faith in Dominique Robinson. I certainly don't have any faith in any people that are behind Dominique Robinson on the depth chart. So it really becomes Austin Booker or bust. So for me, I would much rather see someone like Austin Booker in the mix as a backup with another veteran. Do the Bears see it that way, Dan? I don't know. I have a feeling they're going to be okay going with this group. Maybe they add a low-end edge as like their fourth, fifth edge just in the mix at the bottom of the roster. But I don't know if I'm going to see that, if we're going to see them go out and get like a Zadarius Smith, someone who's going to get significant snaps and be able to play significant edge time. I just don't know if we're going to see that. I would really like to see that, but I don't think we're going to. All right, Billy Kidd. It seems the third wide receiver position is between Zaccheaus and Burden. They both made a strong case so far. Who is it going to be, Bill? Well, this is a great problem to have. And we are genuinely at a point here where the Bears have too many mouths to feed. And that's going to be a good thing for this year. But I think you're also going to see, like, if you're a fantasy football player, I don't know if you're going to see someone on this offense get 1,200 yards and 10 touchdowns. I think we may see a lot of guys with 500-600 yards and 4 touchdowns, 5 touchdowns, and the wealth gets spread around. So while I can't tell you exactly, they want Luther Burden over Zaccheaus, right? That they want. They drafted him. He's young. They like his talent. Burden has looked outstanding. He's buying in with the blocking and in the offensive passing concepts. Burden has been a full buy-in, and that's great to see. But like you said, we've heard about Burden. We've heard about Zaccheaus. Zaccheaus had a touchdown. Like we know they're both involved. We've even heard a little bit more about Rome. I think it's interesting. We haven't heard nearly as much in training camp about DJ Moore. No, I'm not trying to sit there and say DJ Moore is going to be wide receiver 4. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is it's not like a clear-cut DJ Moore is going to be getting 120 targets, and then everyone else is going to be down around 60, 70 targets. I don't know if that's the case. Maybe that's what it ends up being, but I think we're going to see a very equal distribution. I think Luther Burden eventually gets there, but I think we're going to see, like, if Zaccheaus is really good, if Burden is really good, like, you could see, it's not impossible to see something like after the season that DJ Moore gets traded. If they think they can do Rome, Burden, and Zaccheaus 1, 2, 3, and they can move DJ Moore's, $25 million, whatever it is, off the books and use that money elsewhere, they're going to do it because it makes sense to. You don't need to have a high-paid wide receiver if the guys who aren't getting a ton of money below him are doing just as much in the offense. So I'll say Burden, but I also say that, Billy, with the idea that I am a huge fan of Zacchaeus. I really like the signing. The day he signed, I said that's going to be a really good signing for the Chicago Bears. So I'll say Burden because they want Burden. They're going to move him up in the depth chart. But if all four of these guys are healthy with Loveland and Kmet, you've got 6 legitimate targets there. Caleb's not throwing for 6,000 yards. Maybe Caleb throws for 4,000 yards, but, do the equal distribution, 4,000 yards for those 6 guys. Forget the running backs and Durham, Smythe, and some of the other guys. If they get nothing, which we know is not going to be the case, if they get nothing, that's 667 yards per player. So we're going to see a lot of that offense. We're going to see Caleb Williams really distribute that ball around a lot to these different players. All right, Andrew says, based on our limited showing of the ones versus the Bills twos, what are you most looking for seeing our ones go against the Chiefs ones? I'm not too worried about it. I'll say the same things I said to Bobby and at the beginning of this podcast. I want to see clean operation. You're going against the Super Bowl contending team. I know the Bills weren't a Super Bowl contending team because it was their twos. Now you're going to see some of the Chiefs ones. Same thing. Clean operation, not shooting yourselves in the foot. I don't need to see Caleb. I'd love to see Caleb Williams march the ball down the field 80 yards with no challenges and score a touchdown. If it's 1 first down and then they end up punting, Caleb Williams comes out and gets a couple first downs, they end up punting, the offense just looks okay, but they don't score any points. That's not the end of the world. I'm okay with that. But is it a clean operation? Are they getting up to the line of scrimmage with plenty of time? Are they not shooting themselves in the foot with illegal formation penalties and false starts and things like that? If they're doing that again against the Chiefs, I'm okay with whatever the results are on the field as long as they look the proper part. That's all I'm looking for in preseason. I am not looking for this team. I don't need to see this team go wild and be up 14-0. Look, it'd be great if they are, but I don't need to see it. I don't need to see Caleb Williams look elite and throw for 150 yards on 2 drives with 2 touchdowns. We don't need to see it. It's great if we do see it, but what we want to see is things that translate to the regular season, and that's operation and just the kind of the core concepts of the offense. Evan Lepeau, there seems to be a lot of chatter about the Eagles moving Tanner McKee. Do you believe there's a market for Bagent? And if so, what's the realistic return? Bears are not getting Alvin Kamara or Cam Jordan, but what do you slot his value at? Evan, I don't slot his value at very much. Like, Tyson Bagent is a perfectly functional backup quarterback. I think he is a very middle of the pack backup quarterback. I think there are at least half the league's twos that are better than Tyson Bagent. I know Bears fans don't want to hear that. I know when Bears fans think I'm crapping all over Tyson Bagent, I am not. Tyson Bagent is an outstanding find as a UDFA, that he is a, basically run-of-the-mill QB2. That's not an insult. That is a giant compliment to Tyson Bagent and to Ryan Poles that he was able to find this quarterback. The fact that a lot of times Bears fans want to think they can elevate him to this like borderline QB1 status where teams are pounding down the door to try and get him, I just don't see it. I mean, Kirk Cousins is available. If a team wants to go out and get a quality quarterback, they can get Kirk freaking Cousins. You're going to take even the corpse of Kirk Cousins over Tyson Bagent. So if Bagent has a market, if a team wants a QB2, because again, these QB2s, you can find them. You can find a guy that can operate an offense like Tyson Bagent. It's not that hard to find those guys. Like I said, if I ranked QB2s, he'd probably be right around 50 for me, right around 50th overall quarterback, 33 to 64 I'm talking about. He'd probably be right around 50, right? Maybe top 50, maybe just outside the top 50. That's where he is to me. He's right in that area, and that's okay. But that doesn't mean he's going to have a huge market unless there's an injury and a team is really desperate to try and get a quarterback in there. That being said, he doesn't have a high price type market in a trade. I don't think you're going to be able to see 3rd, 4th, probably even a 5th round pick for Tyson Bagent. I think because he's a quarterback, you can get more than a 7, but I don't think you should expect to get more than a 6. Maybe you can get some sort of conditional things tied to it that a 6 can turn into a 5, but you are not going to be able to knock down someone's door and get a day 2 pick for Tyson Bagent. Dolmite 79. How comfortable are you with the running back situation? Would you try to sign Brian Robinson when he's cut? Same question for the defensive end spot as well. We talked about defensive end. I would like to see them go out and beef up that defensive end room. I just don't know if they're going to do it. The running back room is not good. I don't think the running back room is good. I've been pretty consistent with that for this entire off season. I just think the Bears may be like, well, this is just what the running back room is going to be. We'll get a decent run game because Ben Johnson's run scheme is really good. But other than that, I just don't know. Like, look, could they grab a cut veteran like Robinson? Sure. I think that's a possibility. But, I think the Bears this year, Ben Johnson comes in and they're like, all right, where do we need to improve? We need to improve on the offensive line. Done. They go out and they beef up the offensive line. They go to the draft. They say, we need to get, some skill position players. They get Loveland. They get Bird. They clearly tried to get a running back. It didn't work out. I don't know if the Bears are sitting here going, we are Super Bowl contenders this year. They want to see massive improvement. They want to see playoffs. They want to see a team that's buying in. But I think if they're just like, our running back room is just not very good this year, it's what it's going to be. We'll sign a veteran next year. We'll draft a running back high. We'll beef up our running back room for 2026 when we think we are going to be true Super Bowl contenders. All right, let's see. Ryan Schlanzer. Predict the Bears OL room with the final 53, and who do you think they try and sneak on the practice squad? So with this one, I think the sneak, I did the 10 guys at the start of the podcast. Again, I think they're going to do 10 offensive linemen, which means less need for guys on the practice squad. But I think they do 10 offensive linemen, the 5 backups being Benedict, Trapillo, Amagaji, Bates, and Newman. And I think the guy is Bill Murray, is the guy they try and sneak on the practice squad. He has been hurt most of training camp. I have a hard time believing a team is going to give him a 53 spot based on the fact that he just hasn't played. I think Murray goes to the practice squad. I think a center, either Kramer or Stromberg, based on what I've seen, it's probably going to end up being Kramer. Stromberg doesn't look like a guy who's taken it. Even though I loved him coming out of college, that injury has clearly kind of derailed his career. It's really unfortunate for him. But I think that's what you're looking at. They don't need to Josh Miles or anyone that on the practice squad, because if they've got basically 5 tackles on the 53, they don't need extra tackles on the practice squad. At least I don't think they do. So they beef up and have a little extra on the interior guys on the practice squad. I think that's what we look at for the 53. And then eventually, whether it's injuries or things kind of streamline a little bit, they eventually get back down within the first couple of weeks to 9 offensive linemen. If they think they can slide, if someone gets hurt, they move them to the IR. If someone, they try and sneak Amagaji or Benedict back down to the practice squad, something like that, when they need, some more beef at a different position. Jason Black, glad you're back, Bill. Depending on how serious Booker and Domrom injury, do you see the Bears making a move for Clowney as DE3? Don't think Kenneth Walker or Brian Robinson is viable unless you swap one of them for Roshan, but Roshan plays special teams. I'd love to see him make a little bit of a splash at defensive end. I just don't think they're going to. And I do think the running back to watch right now is Roshan Johnson. Yes, he plays special teams, but they have guys like Travis Homer that can play special teams. I don't know about Monangai's ability on special teams or if that's something they want to utilize with him. They have kept around enough special teams guys and having Travis Homer there that they don't probably necessarily need Roshan Johnson. Again, Roshan's a Swiss Army knife, does a lot of things okay, doesn't do a lot of things spectacularly well, but I did think Roshan might be able to be kind of that Jamal Williams guy, not quite as good as that in Ben Johnson's offense in between the tackles, but it seems like Monangai has taken that role really well with Johnson on the sidelines again. So maybe they bring in a veteran instead of Roshan. I don't know if it'd be someone like Kenneth Walker, but, maybe a lower middle of the road guy, Royce Freeman, something like that. We'll see. But I want to see a little, it doesn't have to be a huge splash. I'm not saying go out and get Micah Parsons. I'm open to the idea, but I would like to see them add a little bit of veteran beef to this 53-man roster. I just don't know if we're going to see a lot. We'll have to see. I'm Little John. Haven't seen Turner or Frazier forever. Do you think they start on IR or get cut or to the practice squad? Turner, I think, makes the 53. I know he missed a lot of time, but he is back now. He's starting to practice. I think they just put him on the 53. They're not going to mess with IR. They've got enough depth there. He doesn't have to be their third defensive tackle this year. He doesn't even have to necessarily be their fourth. Chris Williams could be their fourth defensive tackle the first couple weeks while Turner gets up to speed. I think he's fine as an active guy on the 53. And I talked about Frazier at the beginning of the podcast. I don't know exactly what they're going to do, but I just don't see him playing this year. He missed the entire training camp. Like, he's a rookie. He's a 5th-round rookie at that. I can't see him playing this year. So, I can't see any other team picking him up and giving him a spot on the 53 either. So if the Bears do cut him, it does seem like he could certainly get to the practice squad at this point, but we don't know exactly what's going on with him. Does he need to miss the entire season? Is there an actual issue with him and the Bears? I wouldn't think so. I would assume everything here is amicable, but Frazier there's no reason to think he's going to be on the 53-man roster at this point. He's a 5th-round rookie who hasn't played. They have no idea where he is with Dennis Allen's defense and these concepts and all. He's not in the mix. So whether he goes to IR, whether he goes to the practice squad, whether he goes on the failure to report list, I don't know exactly where Frazier is going to be, but I don't think it's going to be on the 53-man roster. But as long as everything is amicable, I also don't think Frazier is going anywhere, at least for this year. But like I said, losing this type of year as a rookie, probably his career has sailed because he's already like 25 years old. What, going to be 26, 27 years old the first couple of years in the league. That's a very small window for a cornerback to have any level of success. I wouldn't have wanted Frazier just based on his age and his competition levels in college. Poles, threw a dart anyway. Now he has missed the training camp. So like I said, I think that draft pick has just kind of sailed, unfortunately. Lester A. Wilt Fong Jr. What is the most likely position the Chicago Bears are looking for off the waiver wire? I think they're going to like the cornerback depth, Lester. I think they've got their safeties and their linebackers set. Edge is certainly a position. I don't think they're going to mess with defensive tackles. Maybe if there's a really surprise tackle out there and they don't trust Braxton Jones, maybe they can do something wild at tackle. But I think the offensive line, quarterbacks, wide receivers are all set. If there's an interesting 4th tight end that they can add, maybe they do something there, because beyond Durham Smythe, I just didn't see any other tight ends step up and really take that role. And it's the running back situation. I don't know if they'd carry a 5th running back, but do they trust Roschon Johnson to be able to stay on the field? And if they don't, who's the guy that they can pick up and be that RB2, RB3? Whoever they pick up is probably also going to have to play special teams as well. So that's the way I see things playing out with this 53-man roster next week. So that's going to do it for Bears Banter. We are basically at the regular season. So with this podcast, we are kind of kicking off the Bears Banter season. We will be here regularly and, of course, weekly throughout the regular season, and regularly leading up to we'll have another one before week 1 kicks off against the Minnesota Vikings. That's going to do it for Bears Banter. We'll talk to you again soon. Bear down, everybody. Adios.